sound that saved a wretch like me.
Hello and welcome to Interfaith Insights, Spotlight on Faith with myself, Ian Stewart, and two very special guests who you were welcomed to see just recently on our show. We have today Mehr, Mansuri, and also actress Nancy Nelson-Ewing, both well-known playwrights and both known from the wonderful Henry Box Brown, the musical, as well as so many other wonderful musical productions and the Children's Theatre Company, if I'm getting that right, but we'll come back to that and we'll talk about that just in a minute. Now, obviously, the Henry Box Band, the musical, has enjoyed such tremendous success. It was a Edinburgh Fringe, I think, festival winner here. I remember seeing the show. Every time I think it had a standing ovation. People just were very moved by that show. Something within that show really spoke to people. Obviously, it is a show about slavery. It deals with a very difficult topic, but it also takes the audience on a journey, but it does give also some hope that even in the darkest times there is still some hope ahead. And we really want to talk about Henry Box Brown as well, how that resonates with people and how it's continuing to resonate and perhaps is taking on other meaning. Now, first of all, I'm really interested in how this concept of theatre and moral reasoning has come about, and how have you ended up actually working in schools and communities in some of the poorer parts of New York, putting on musicals with young people, and a lot of them obviously are from African-American youth and children. What led you from being an actress and a playwright into that kind of situation?
There's three very big questions there. How did I go from actress to playwright? How do we work with New York City schools? And how did Theatre for Moral Reasoning work? Did I get that
They all seem to be intertwined in some way.
No, of course they are, and thank God for that, because if it wasn't organic, it would be contrived and false and not authentic, and that can't be theater. Certainly that can't be my own sense of volition to get up and do this. It's a lot of heavy lifting that I feel like the paycheck has been in the spiritual compensation, and so you really do have to be purposeful and principled and mission-centered when you get up and try to figure out how to wrap your brain around your purpose. You see that I've changed venues, so
that's lovely. It's very nice.
You're going to have continuity issues now.
That's fine.
But it'll be the sign of the times, right?
Absolutely. So you're telling me how you ended up producing theatre for schools.
Yeah, so the idea to really do theater, I mean, I always like to joke, there's 5 sure ways never to generate income: work in the theater, work in nonprofit, work with underserved populations, work with interfaith organizations, and work in education. Like 5 sure ways. So, but that's why you have to wake up with purpose and mission and vision. And so, just the notion of theater as a tool for moral reasoning has really, I think, been in the wiring of how I was born, raised, and kicked out of my native Iran. And it caused wonderful conversations at home about religious persecution and freedom of conscience, really, because in Iran, my family could not practice being Baha'is. Baha'is were being readily, their homes were raided and they were taken to prison for just being Baha'is. There was no protest, there was no civil unrest from Baha'i community, but because growing largest non-Islamic minority, it became a target to that regime. So we had to speak about what it is to really embody the notion of contentment and faith, and also, what is freedom of conscience? And for us, freedom of conscience meant practicing your beliefs. Then I come to America and I started to see 2 kinds of freedoms that were in question. One was freedom from bondage, which was the slavery that no one wanted to address or even put in their history books. And then I started to see another form of freedom of conscience, which was the white people who clearly were carrying a burden of their history and even perpetuating it unknowingly or knowingly. What we are learning is called unconscious bias. I'm not sure some of it is conscious, some of it seems very conscious, and right now it's all out sanctioned racism, let's face it. But to me, really revisiting this idea of freedom of conscience really became a whole new idea. We were practicing freedom of conscience by leaving Iran and practicing our faith, and our faith in action, being a Baha'i. But in America, I really questioned whether or not Americans have freedom of conscience, so to speak, white America, because this we know as spiritual beings, you cannot do this kind of heinous things to each other and really be free. So for me, those questions really informed my pursuit of what kind of theater I wanted to be involved in. I've always loved theater. I've always loved language and storytelling. So in college, I decided to really study Bertolt Brecht, who really was interested in a proper message and actual propaganda, no apologies for it. But he still has the onus of, or the challenge of taking the audiences on his journey and still creating a work of art and not just being about leaflets and propaganda. But he had an idea of looking at our conscience. And actually, I mean, to be honest, just being exposed to good old-fashioned Greek theater, of course, we know the roots of all of it is in Egypt and Africa, but in the unfortunate but fortunate documentation of recorded history, we know that back to ancient Greece, the notion of democracy was born out of theater. And so for me, it really just roots back to just being exposed to theater in its origins. And, back in 6th century BC, when there was clan conflicts and divisions among warring tribes, it was one of those, I don't want to bore you with history, but 534-ish BC, this general named Pisistratus, I believe, Pisistratus, he got tired of all the divisions among his citizens, and he decided to start an annual theater festival. I'm sure stolen from the African diaspora, but there it was. And in that stroke of genius to bring 4 tribes in a common space to share a common experience, it was really nothing short of revolutionary. And the the Athenian consciousness began to change. And what was for me very informing of what kind of theater I wanted to create was the idea that it was a civic duty to go to the theater and it's like the airing and the hearing of multiple truths. And this opportunity to develop empathy actually, in my opinion, happens in theater. It does not necessarily happen in places of worship, although I do believe the stories in our Bibles, in our Qurans, in our Bhagavad Gitas, in our Baha'i literature, the empathy is built through the modeling of our spiritual prophet founders and their lives and the living example of their sacrifice. But the theater really gives a life to the airing of these multiple truths, and for us to really lean in and align ourselves and develop those empathy muscles. And it's kind of like working out in the gym. So I feel like if we start to create empathy muscles, it's like a real seismic psychic shift where, there's this Oliver Wendell Holmes who had a quote that the mind once expanded to the dimensions of larger ideas never returns to its original size. So if we're able to exercise the mind to really encompass those ideas, those empathy ideas, and to have dialogue replace rhetoric, which God knows we're hearing too much of, it brings me back to why theater and why as a tool for moral reasoning, that really dialogue and empathy are inextricably linked, my favorite way of framing it. And it's that, a lot of people ask me, so why do Henry Box Brown now? But it's the past, we've moved on. Or some people think slavery is an ugly time, we don't get inspired, and we're definitely not reenacting slavery in this show. We're really looking at the capacity for transcendence. But in resurrecting the inner life of a man, or a people that lived, 200 years ago, we begin to just realize that their struggles inextricably evoke our own familiar, our own present, our own damaged present. So I feel like in many ways, by looking at the past, we're getting to look closer at the present. So those are some of the reasons Henry Box Brown, the moral reasoning, the school world, if you want, let's go to Nancy on this, and then I'll come back to you about, how did the school model get created?
I mean, it really strikes me that you had an empathy for the communities, and maybe particularly in a sense, the African American community, because you could probably identify some of the persecution, or you felt some of the injustice that they were going through, that you could relate that to your own experience.
It's so funny you should say that. I would like to say that I could relate that, but I see the closer I get to understanding the African American community, the farther I get in seeing how much damage is done. how much damage there is and how much damage has to be undone. It's really, it's not as close to the immigrant experience by any measure of the word. It only gives me more empathy for the conditions that they've continuously gone through, and completely make myself like, listen, I had it great, and so did all the other. My husband like escaped on the back of an apple cart, hid in a cave, had $50 in his pocket, and you know, some people have lived dire transitions from that world to this world of escaping. But but unfortunately, I don't know if it developed. I have to say, truthfully, I really was wired around social justice imperatives and productions that spoke about that. And the truth is that the African American community just gave me a shot, and they embraced me and my stories and my willingness to ask their children to decide to actually be not about Matilda and Annie, we love those great shows, but to be about something else as well. And so the fact that they understood that some crazy Iranian lady wants to talk about social justice with 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds, and we'll let her do it, is really the blessing and the generosity of the African American community, who allowed that art form with kids as the voices of positive change. You know, the Henry Box Brown production in Edinburgh was a Broadway level cast, but for the last 20 years, I've worked with kids doing that. So it's really a remarkable, again, sign of the resilience of the, and the interest and the passions of the African American community, really paving the way. And I hate to do it this way, but from music to the arts to developing empathy, I feel like that's where the golden treasure is in partnering with this community.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's a black artist here, who was saying, you love our music. Now you have to start having appreciation for us, you know, as a people.
That's right. That's so exactly what more of that. What is the word for it, Nancy? When we rip off. Continue to rip off.
Appropriate.
Yeah, we're just appropriating all of it. So yeah, it's really.
Nancy, I'm interested to know when you guys connected, and when someone comes along with this idea saying, I want to do these stories that are speaking with focus probably an African American community. It's going to tell the story of slavery. Someone who's come from an Iranian background comes to you and says, you know, I have this idea. Can we work together?
And she's a playwright too, by the way, very prominent
too, I know. I just wonder, did you think, where's this person coming from? Or
that's an interesting question, Ian. And typically, I really am not a fan of slave stories. Just typically speaking.
Yeah.
In terms of Hollywood, right? Because it always seems like those are the stories they go for.
Yeah.
12 years a slave, the help, the butler, it's always those stories, right? About that part of our history as African Americans. And as an actor also, those would be the parts, right, that I would go up for, the suffering mother, and so when, and
there's been, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been a big debate recently, even the actress who was it The Help, saying, am I actually letting down my culture by taking these roles? So it's an interesting
exactly, yeah. So there's a lot that you go through as an African American artist, right? Because we're not coming from it at it from the same place, right? There's so much history, but we try and balance it all out because we do want to work. We are artists, and like I said, a slave play was like the last thing I wanted to be involved in. But in talking with Mehr, and having a deeper understanding of what and how she was using this project, that this was not just to be performed as entertainment, that it was to be presented as a way to have conversation about these very important issues, about this dark history. And then I realized, well, you don't want to repeat your past, and we have to talk about these things. So let's start with slavery, and then move from there. And it's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable, but it's important because it still does have an impact on all of us, African Americans in particular. I mentioned the other day post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is brilliant work written by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And she really gives us the science of the way trauma really goes into our cells, our DNA, and it continues generation after generation, especially when that trauma is still continuing in the life that you are living generation after generation. Right. It might have morphed into not quite the same, lynching, as widely, excuse me, but there's still George Floyd lynching going on, right? And so to then take this on as an artist, as someone who's going to have interactive conversations with a diverse audience, I thought this is challenging but necessary. And the whole slave play story, and I was willing to take that journey.
Can I ask? We'll have a kick back. What is the difference between how Henry Box Brown does it and something like 12 Years a Slave that you've mentioned? So what is it about the format that you feel allows people to have those conversations or that interaction?
Well, I think the way we have it all set up, it's part of the program. You don't just walk out after the curtain call. We have the audience stay and engage in conversation. We've all had this communal experience, this really spiritual journey that we took with this character. And this is all part of the tool as moral reasoning. This is how we are using it. We bring people together. We show this very kind of dark, but then ultimately triumphant story. And then we talk about it. We talk about that dark history, and we talk about how the society was designed, how it was implemented, the way it was constructed on the backs, excuse me, on the backs of these enslaved people, and how white people are still benefiting from that. How America became the power country that it became because of that. And how racism is still part of our society and how it plays out. And
so the third player in this is the audience, really. Yeah. And that's
right.
Really,
and that gives us that space to talk about after they've seen the story. They're there, they're captive. We have questions, we have activities.
Social action.
Yeah. And so that's why, for me, I was able to kind of go, okay, yeah, let's do this. And not just with the audience, with the cast as well. We've worked and talked about history and how it is impacting us as artists, as artists, Black and white, working together, how it emotionally is affecting us, how we, we talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome, talked about white fragility. We brought up all of these subjects that, are very difficult to talk about, and we've all benefited from that.
And Nancy has truly created this safe space. This in itself is a work of art and a work of a sensitive, thoughtful African-American woman. And really it has to become, I'm so blessed to have found her, because she's a writer, she's an actress, she understands what actresses are going through a half hour before showtime, she understands what audiences are experiencing, she understands it from a pedagogical place, she understands it from a performing place, and of course she has the background and history to really help us go there. And then creating that safe space, whether it's for actors putting themselves on the line or for audiences to want to talk, white ones, Black ones, people who are immigrants and they don't think they're part of the problem because they think they're a person of color, or the ones like me who pass for white and have other fringe benefits. There's a lot of subtlety in this, at least in America. And for someone like Nancy to create a safe space for the meaningful conversation to happen, and really for the listening to happen, is in itself an art form. And really, she's now working with me on an amazing enterprise of creating pre-show workshops with our students in schools.
So can I ask you about when you first had this concept for how you would do this? How did you approach it with don't know if your voice is your vocals.
I'm listening. I'm just on mute.
I just wonder if you approached it to potential funders, or you're trying to explain to people you're going to do theatre in a very different way. How people thought. Did people think, oh, I'm not sure this is going to happen. This is going to work in a theatre concept, and then just trying to think how it worked out from those early shows, what it was like.
I'm a very bad businesswoman. I never care about the money. Never thought about the money. Never cared about the money, and just believe that money will come from the right people at the right time. So I don't know.
But even I can imagine, even as someone who came from a teaching background, there are a lot of very delicate, sensitive issues that you're talking about. And in some of these schools that I'd imagine in America would be thinking, oh, she's going to open up a real can of worms here, and you're going to have people talking about all these things. So how was that managed earlier on?
I can.
Not a big issue.
It's a great, wonderful, loving, lucky situation. Really, we had been producing one-act musicals for kids from every theme in the universe. And we were saying to people, we are inspired by the United Nations calendar, where it's Human Rights Day, the Environment Day, Race Amity Day, Advancement of Women, literacy, poverty, people with disabilities. Like every day on the UN calendar, we wanted to have a musical or a story adapted. So when we as I said earlier, that when I first started, I happened to be teaching at a private school. I don't know if I mentioned that we had a minority outreach program where 200 gifted and talented African-American kids and Hispanic kids were invited to participate in this extra school, and then they would get to go to this fancy private school in New York, and we were the teachers that would sort of bring them to some kind of they weren't intellectual, they were advanced, but they had to have like the basic curriculum covered. So I inherited this incredible community of gifted and talented kids and families of people of color. And so with that incredible beginning of support of families who were really dedicated and interested, they were not all poor, they were middle class, all levels, but they were, Hispanic and African American. We got a chance to really work out our ideas. And I really did not propose a play. It came out of a need. These kids grew up with us over the last 20 years. And the Dr. Seuss plays that we adapted early on soon became original plays that we wrote on these social issues. And the kids really grabbed onto it. And African-American churches that we worked with grabbed onto it. And the families grabbed onto it. And they just really believed in this. We all were together in letting our children be the voices of positive change, using the theater as a tool for moral reasoning. And when 9/11 happened, we'd already been around 3 years. And so when 9/11 happened, I remember the day, it was on a Tuesday, I got all the calls from parents because we're supposed to perform at the UN with Nelson Mandela later that month. And the UN event got canceled. And the kids and parents were calling me saying, what is this thing? It's literally 8:45, the first building goes down. By 9 o'clock, I'm getting calls from parents. And at 9 a.m., they're saying, there's a concert canceled. Is this a worldwide event? And we didn't know how big it was. And they said, are we rehearsing on Tuesday? We're just thinking in small. I said, what, you're going to be in quarantine, or you're going to be locked up from Tuesday, Wednesday. Nobody's going to be allowed in downtown New York for the next 5 days. I think you're going to want to come out on Saturday. So I say, get your kids out. There's going to have to be some interesting, meaningful, safe conversation about what's just happened. And sure enough, by Saturday, when our rehearsals were, the parents and the kids were all eager to come together. And they all, we all wept and cried and didn't know what's going to happen to our big show with Nelson Mandela. Again, not understanding the worldwide kind of impact, or at least the American impact. And I said to the kids, we don't have to rehearse today. It doesn't feel right. Let's go out into the park. And we're just going to do our Peacemaker Quotes. These are quotations that the kids memorize for the curtain call. And it's from Gandhi and Einstein and Jesus and Moses and Muhammad and Buddha and Ralph Cramden and Miss Piggy and, George Carlin, anybody who wants to say something about peace, love, and unity. And so everybody had memorized a quote. And they were like, really? Are you sure we're going to go do our quote? I said, we're not going to rehearse it. We're just going to go out in the park and practice outdoors. And so I said, let me just hear one of your quotes. And the first kid raised her hand and she said, our spiritual power, our scientific power will outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men. Martin Luther King Jr. And we all stared at each other because, of course, the missile was just guided and our spiritual power had been outrun by our scientific power. And
Wow.
suddenly all these quotes had a whole new meaning.
Wow.
And I said, let's line up everybody. I mean, 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds marched up. We went into Union Square Park and everybody got in a big circle, and we protected the kids in a big parent circle, and they just projected their quotes. 3,000 people gathered around these kids. The cameras went up. Sorry for the anecdote. The point was that we have been doing this work before it was relevant, before it was on the 10 o'clock news, before the Black History Month became Black History Month more than it ever was. And the Black communities are the ones who really supported it so that it could have the audacity to have an Iranian woman say, so what do you guys think? Because now they're 18, 15, 20 and saying, do you have any plays about us? And that was when I went about in searching for a story, and nobody wanted to really look at Black history on stage.
Yeah, so I mean, when you had been through that kind of traumatic experience, being there, helping gel that community, giving that community a voice, a safe space where they can have a voice, you're also built that trust and understanding that allowed you to then come and do something quite radical, like Henry Box Brown, which is great. It gave you a platform for that. I can see that. I think one of the difficulties I can imagine with someone like Henry Box Brown, and I'm thinking, Nancy, again, to you on this, is people really feel a responsibility to their culture, and they also don't they don't want to misrepresent things. It must put it's a kind of added pressure on people, and people, I would imagine, putting people also under a kind of another kind of spotlight. How do people approach these kind of roles? I mean, you're also working with the actors, and there must be an added kind of stress and kind of responsibility.
Nancy, you also address your play, A Town Called Witness. I think she can really bring it home with that, her latest play.
Yeah, well, I think, it's so funny because the first day with the cast, when we introduced this whole new line of working one-on-one, or not one-on-one, but with the cast, and talking about race and racism, a lot of the actors, particularly the white actors, I must say, were like, well, we're actors. We don't need this extra work. You give us a script, we learn the lines, we go on stage, do our job, right? And I think that because we really approached it with this additional layer of sensitivity, and our very first session really, I think, brought on the understanding of how important it was to talk about it, because it's not business as usual. I'm sorry, I don't think just because we're all professionals, we're still human beings, right? And this is a real history. This was not something from out of space. This was something that actually happened and impacts our lives. So by being able to talk in those terms, people begin to generally, eventually realize, yes, this is important. We did meditation, we meditated together, and we got down to the essence of who we are as human beings. There was not a Black person in the room. There was not a white person in the room. There was not a male or female in the room. It was just the essence of a being in the room. And we were all in there together, sharing this space and really feeling very spiritually connected in that moment, and being able to see and feel the human energy of all of us, excuse me, and how we, put on these garments of race and gender and all of these things, and how they can actually burden us down. I mean, they are necessary as we, move through life in this society, but they really can be quite burdensome. And for white people as well, because they feel as though their whiteness has no impact, that their whiteness is not part of the racism story. And once they realize that, no, my whiteness impacts it very much so, I think they just got a completely different perspective of it. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but just about the authenticity of approaching a role, that you have to, with a role like this, when you're talking about slavery and trauma, I think you really have to have an additional emotional layer of depth and conversation.
I can imagine different actors will be able to handle these things very differently. For some people, they can almost hang the role like a hat at the end of the day. But
that's right. I don't know if you remember the movie about the slave ship. Remember years ago? I can't remember.
Amistad.
Yes. Where they really reenacted being, taken off the island in the ships and having be, bonded together. And, they were saying that these actors were having breakdowns when the white crew would come over and, to them, these are props, these chains, right? But to these African-American actors, that DNA, that trauma was being awakened. They were being re-injured, right? By having these chains put on them, especially by white people, And I believe that they did bring on people on the set to kind of talk about it, because it was affecting them way after the cameras start rolling. And so that's kind of what we were attempting to do with this work and with our actors.
It's very powerful. And kind of, I mean, you've talked about it creates a platform for discussion. What is it that you hope people will leave with? How do you hope this will impact on people?
Is that me?
Can be either of you. But both.
Sure, Nancy, go ahead.
I think because we say, all right, we're going to talk about race now. We're going to talk about this dark history. We're going to talk about how that happened, about that social construct of race and racism in America. And how it happened and how we got to where we are right here. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about privilege, white skin privilege. Let's talk about these things. Let's see, where the truth is. Where does the truth lie in all of this? And, I have to say, as crazy as things are in America right now with everything that's going on politically, I feel like this administration has really been able to shine a light on this subject matter to open the space up even more, because it is so blatant. It is like the biggest spotlight you can imagine, and people who have a certain kind of belief of their superiority feel empowered to come out and speak, which brings other people out to speak. And I think it's just bringing people out, and these conversations are happening in real time. And I think that's why it feels so different. I mean, even with the coronavirus, I mean, this is all a perfect storm, that has happened in America, where people were quarantined, watching these things on TV. It's not just, water fountain talk at the office, It's really happening. And I think people are just more engaged.
I'm interested. I was just going to say, just adding to that, just speaking, when you have Henry Box Brown tours to different areas, and you have, a tragedy happening. I mean, obviously, something like, the killing of George Floyd. Does that impact then on the discussions that happen? Have you had an incident where Henry Box Brown has been showing in an area where there has been some incident, and then this has spilled into some of the conversations during the show?
Well, we haven't done Henry Box Brown since February because of the COVID crisis.
Sure.
So in some ways, we're excited, anxious, and serious about listening to maybe new voices and new ideas. We have been on Facebook, and, there was one woman who went to see the show and said, well, I wish that you could tell more of his life, and why just end where it ends, and or why did you even make him a hero? He's not a hero because he, didn't do this and didn't do that, because his life is complex and layered. There's been some, but that was just one person. Like, most people are so grateful. I have to say, as the pandemic continues to become worse and worse in the U.S., our numbers are going up. It's just, we're leading the world. In the pandemic, we certainly have been thinking that the Black history will now once again take a back burner, because now we have a worldwide pandemic, and so this this black pandemic will not be of interest. And so, to be very honest, the George Floyd thing has allowed us, like Nancy was saying, to realize that our souls and our communities and our countries are under monumental crisis, some physical and some spiritual. And the spiritual is no less dangerous and life-threatening to our sanity and to our existence. And you know, when you ask me what do we hope to achieve and what will this production, I mean, for me, it's an opportunity to use this history as a way to remind ourselves in a way that we're being watched by our ancestors, and that through these stories, I mean, this is a true story and it's told through him, by him. I took much of the language from his own narrative. And I don't know if many people know this, but these Negro spirituals and these, they call them slave narratives, are original testimonials that were given in interview by legitimate journalists. And they were sort of put aside as folklore, not fact, and never made it to American history books. So when the Time magazine in February this year, before the George Floyd pandemic, said that 8% of American high school students even know that the basis of the American Revolution, the Civil War, was slavery. They don't even know that. You know, why our play is, you know, not just restorative justice by restoring those chapters, but also that through these ancestors, they continuously present to us their gifts of their wisdom, and they bear witness, they warn us, they inspire us. And I think, you know, the lessons that we take from the past are, so for me, they really inform and inspire. And we particularly took note to not reenact the brutality of slavery without sugarcoating it. So if you recall the production, we kind of looked to the triumph of the human spirit, and still to the three key turning points that had like the real agony of losing a child. So yeah, I think that's the point, is that we are really getting to, you know, how will we do it? How does George Floyd impact us? I mean, we actually, let me give you one last quick story. We had entered a festival in New York that is for musicals. It's a very prominent festival. I don't want to mention the names right now, but we're not in yet. And we've made it to sort of the final cut, but we're not in yet. And we got a call from the festival planners. This is a festival where every production that makes it to Broadway has had a tryout at a regional theater, or through this festival has found a producer or a theater to kind of get the kinks out, right? So it's really everybody's dream. They have about 400 applications. They only select 8 productions. So they called us and said, look, you know, we weren't sure if you're going to make it past this point, but as of this latest protest around the world, we've really restructured and rethought our entire jury system, and we've reappointed our jury to include more people of color. And so now you've made it to the final cut, and now we want you to know, and we want you to tell us if you're okay in being in the final cut, but it will be a Zoom production. It will not be a live, which originally, you know, they would pay quite a bit of money to have a New York production. So we you know, there are people that are affected by the Floyd pandemic, and looking at how people of color and stories of color are getting out there.
It's really interesting, because when you're talking about things related to telling the history and where so much of this history has been forgotten, or it's just not recognised by people. We're having a similar debate in the UK, where they are looking for Black history to be taught in schools, where they're looking for slavery to be recognised. Many of our streets have slave names. You know, they're named after, you know, slave masters. Wow. And they want these streets kind of taken down, some prominent streets. Wow. We have things like, you know, Jamaica Street, different places in Glasgow, which were all related to the sugarcane industry and different things. In the centre of Edinburgh, the biggest statue there is Henry Dundas, who is known to have delayed the slave trade by at least the abolition of slavery by at least 15 years. So it's creating a big debate about whether we should take down these statues, how do we teach history in schools, how do we, but of course, one of the other interesting things about this is, as I noticed speaking to lots of friends across communities, is people don't just want to be remembered for slavery. or we also want to have a different way to celebrate our cultures.
That's right.
And that's one of the challenges as well, isn't it?
Well, I think Nancy kind of alluded to that. Tell us, Nan.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much rich history that we have not been taught about. I'm starting with slavery because that's sort of the beginning of it in this country, but the accomplishments, the scientists, the inventors, the artists, the history of African Americans in this country goes way beyond slavery. And the input, the reason that we have, the music that we have. Washington D.C. was designed by an African American. So many inventions, so much. I mean, and let's go back to Egypt. Mathematics, the science of all of that. I mean, I don't want to be stuck on slavery. And I've been doing my own research lately, and every time I come across something that I knew nothing about growing up, in school, like I'd never heard of this person. I didn't know that there was a society of African American women all over this country who were educated, who were doctors, who were journalists. I mean, Ida B. Wells, one of the most outspoken African American women, and her connection with British women during the suffragette movement, and the impact that she's had and the voice that she's had to raise consciousness of Black women, and her anti-lynching movement. And there's just been so much history that we have not been taught intentionally, because knowledge is power, knowledge is currency. And in a racist society, you don't want to give people power that you are oppressing, So this has all been by design. But, somebody's knocking at my door. I think it's a package. I'll get it later. But it's all been intentional, just the things like redlining, for example, have been put into law. Don't let Black people move into this community, because we want this to be a nice white suburb, and they're just not allowed to move in this community. And it's just so many laws on the books that we don't even know existed, that were intentional to create this separation, this racist separation, and this inequity, and all of this. It's just mind-blowing. It's just overwhelming.
Do you feel that there's something in the theatre productions that you do that are encouraging, hopefully, the next generation to challenge the injustice within the system? It's to give them hope as well, to challenge that can be challenged.
Well, I think hope is in the
character stuff.
Yeah, you have to always have hope. And I think young people nowadays, I'm so impressed with how they are standing up and speaking out for themselves. And that gives me hope. They are not, sitting on the sidelines. They are using their voices. They are using their bodies. They are going out in the front lines. And I'm, my children have gone to protest, and I get a little nervous, but I'm always like, yeah, go, but
Good
be
on
careful, yeah.
And I think the idea of these statues, I mean, who knows what everyone has an opinion. I think these statues do belong in history. I think we should know what we've done and how quickly we can go back. I think they do, but I just think they should go to a museum.
Yeah.
And then go, this is how racism got its start.
That's right.
This guy, why can't we just take this work of art and stick it in the museum where all the other bad guys live?
Well, it's very interesting, because I had an interview with Hamza Yusuf, who's our cabinet minister for justice, and he said the same thing. He would like to remove all the statues and put them into a museum where people can go and be educated. But it has created a huge argument here, because people with Henry Dundas, some just wanted the plaque written. He wasn't such a good guy after all.
Right.
We can't forget. We can't forget to.
Because I'm sorry, it does. You have another generation of kids who are going to learn that these people were the heroes and they were white, and these people. So unless you give a counterpart statue, where we can actually balance that history. That's the difficulty, because they do have messages to give. And maybe a museum. I just don't know if I could stand seeing a statue of Hitler in a museum. So I might be contradicting myself.
But I mean, as dark as it is, I think, the saying is, if you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat
You're doomed to repeat it.
Exactly.
I'm just going to wrap up just a minute. Just one question that's just popped in my head also is, coming from a Baha'i perspective, how do you relate to the spirituality that goes through Henry Box Brown that seems has a very kind of gospel Christian connection? I know, Nancy, you grew up in a Baptist church, so it won't be so unfamiliar for you. But
I hope that we can hear from Nancy. But the spiritual, if you're speaking to his gospel experience and his deeply Christian experience as being not Baha'i, and so how was that for me to reconcile, right? Well, it's
I guess in a way some Baha'i friends would say they could connect that there's a kind of universal truth in all religions that
for me, I'm a born again Baha'i. By that I mean that we were really raised as Baha'is to believe that God is one, and all these teachers come from the same God, and there is one divine book and many chapters in it.
Sure.
And so if you really believe that these are all different chapters of one divine book, and the author of each chapter was manifested in the form of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, or Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, in recorded history. By the way, I was also raised to believe that indigenous people had divine knowledge from the divine, but it wasn't recorded in the same way. So we know that from the 3 wives of Abraham, the prophets came. And so from there, all these divine chapters and guidance from God came, and I got to learn all that. So when I really believed it, I literally went to a Jewish school in Iran. I went to a Muslim school in Iran. I went to a Christian school all through my British years. I know my hymns. That's still put up a Christmas tree. So for me, religious history is not just an intellectual experience, it's actually a nostalgic experience. I actually grew up enjoying the celebrating of in real kid life of this oneness. And then of course, when I start to hear those spirituals, they evoke for me personally the same feelings I would as in a Baha'i prayer. So there is no deviation at all. In fact, I feel like I'm a better Baha'i the more I know about all the former and support religions of the past. Nancy, do we have time for more?
I mean, absolutely. Yes, I was raised as a Baptist. And when I first started learning about the Baha'i faith, everything just resonated with my spirit. And I kept thinking, but what about Jesus Christ? What about Jesus Christ? And then when I realized, Jesus Christ, you have to believe in Jesus Christ. It's progressive revelation. It's Jesus, it's Muhammad, it's Baha'u'llah. They're all from that same source. And then one of the things in the Baha'i faith talks about African Americans or people of the African diaspora as pupil of the eye, which is a very high spiritual station in the Baha'i faith, where the African people of African descent have the spiritual capacity to lead the entire world into this world unity, this unifying place where we are all understanding our one humanity together. I mean, not just from the suffering that we've had in this country as slaves, but it's sort of our spiritual destiny to be able to see all of this, because we have been sort of the observers all of these years. We've been the observers of white people and all of these different cultures, and we understand there's a depth of understanding, and the Baha'i writings talk about that in a way that as an African American in my church, I never heard before. As much as I love that background, and it has really, helped me as a human being and fueled me in my artistry, these writings from the Baha'i faith bring all of that, all of my religious history right here for me in present day.
Wow, that's a great summation of it. So, in kind of coming to a conclusion, what's next for the children's theatre, and what's next, I guess, for you both?
It is so crazy. We've decided not to sit still, even though we're all in our living rooms in quarantine. And because this, the next step for Henry Box Brown was a 6-city tour. We did the Savannah arm, and we're about to do the other 5 cities when we were, when the quarantines happened. So we decided to go back to our very first city where it all began in Flint, Michigan, where with the New Standard Academy, a great school, a public school in Flint, and the Llewellyn Baha'i Center for Learning, we were given the chance to pilot this whole idea of doing Henry Box Brown and then doing post-show workshops with schools and colleges and churches, and then go back with Glimmerings of Hope, same thing, and then actually start a children's theater chapter so that, as Nancy said, we don't do a dog and pony show and leave town. So the notion of social action would be through community engagement and actually continuing using theater as a tool for moral reasoning. Only the beneficiaries would be kids and families. So with that in mind, we had literally hired a full-time teacher last fall, right after we came out of Edinburgh Festival, and we were ready to launch a 1-year pilot program in a public school that gave us a full state-of-the-art, brand new, mint condition, phenomenal professional theater in exchange for a fully salaried teaching artist who would do our material. Well, by February, we were in quarantine, and we thought, in March, we said, you know what, we're just going to go online and do a what we call living room theater. So we're now reinventing our community engagement theater with kids online, and every week, 3 days a week, starting yesterday or Tuesday was our first day, we have a 4-week summer camp where those Flint kids are participating in theater as a tool for moral reasoning on Zoom.
Fantastic.
Crazy.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah. And I'm there as a teaching artist. I'm also a writer. I just had one of my plays done on Facebook Live. I'd gotten an individual artist grant for it, a town called Witness, that talks about the power of the written word and the media and finding your voice and speaking up as a mother who loses a son in this whole scenario. It's spoken word, it's song, it's prose and music. So, and it was a wonderful success, and we got it done on Zoom. So, I'm hoping to just continue with my writing and working with children in this process.
We can't wait to see that, and we hope that maybe one day you'll bring one of these shows, Nancy, to Edinburgh as well.
I'd love to.
Definitely, Nancy's coming to Edinburgh. I'm saying it right now. I'll be the first to say it.
Is there any last message that you want to just to leave people with?
No, but I just want to personally thank you that this is such an important service, because we have not taken a breath to connect the dots of what's happening, and for you to bring all these communities together, and for you to think about a theater production in August of last year, and to bring us back into the conversation. We feel like the world in this experience right now is one, and you've really modeled that in incredible, important work you're doing, that you're bringing us all together from all these different places. Thank you.
Well, we've just all been inspired by the, just the fantastic vision that you've had, and the power of Henry Box Brown has just connected so many people and given so much hope to so many. And when it feels that there is no hope, so we really are indebted to you all. Thank you so much.
If I want to leave with one thing, and that is there is always hope, right? Without hope, you have nothing. And so to always be hopeful, even in the darkest times, think about Henry, who mailed himself in that box, how hopeless he might have felt at certain times, but he got to Philadelphia, he got to his freedom. And we always have to keep in mind the triumph of the spirit, the human spirit.
That's a wonderful way to end. That's it, Mehr. Thank you very much.
But now I'm found. I once was blind.